The storm raged within you. It was not a storm of thunder or rain, but of voices, fears, and promises that collided in your chest. You stood in the silence of your own doubt, hearing nothing but the echo of a call you could not explain. The chosen one. That was the whisper, the name the heavens gave to those who wrestle with purpose until it breaks them open. You tried to ignore it. You told yourself you were ordinary, just another name among millions. But destiny has a strange way of speaking. It repeats itself until silence becomes unbearable. You woke one morning with that same weight pressing on your soul, a sense that something vast and unseen had turned its gaze toward you, not as a reward, but as an invitation, a summons. This was not about wealth, not really. It was about responsibility, about a river that wanted to flow through you but needed your courage to open the gates. You felt it, the tension between faith and fear, between the life you knew and the one calling your name. The chosen one does not choose their moment. The moment chooses them. You looked around, and everything seemed unchanged. The same walls, the same sky, the same uncertain world. Yet inside you, everything was shifting. You could feel the edges of your old life dissolving, like sand slipping through fingers you could no longer close. A voice whispered again, softer this time, like wind brushing over the surface of water. Step into it. The blessing is already written. Your name is carved into the promise. But you hesitated, because you remembered every failure. Every time you thought God had forgotten you. You remembered praying into the darkness and hearing nothing back. And now this? A call to abundance when all you had known was lack? You clenched your fists. If this was divine, then why the struggle? Why the silence? Yet even as you questioned, something within you stirred. The same thing that stirs inside every soul on the edge of awakening. A flicker of defiance, a whisper of belief. The chosen one rises not in confidence, but in contradiction. You wanted to believe. You wanted to trust that there was meaning beyond the chaos, a purpose hidden beneath the weight of unanswered prayers. You wanted to believe that the pain had been preparation, that the loneliness had carved the space for something sacred. So you closed your eyes. You listened deeper than before. The silence broke not with sound, but with knowing. You saw it. A vault sealed for generations cracking open. Gold light spilling through the fractures. Not money, not power. Revelation. A truth too bright to look at directly. The blessing wasn't coming to you, it was awakening through you. And that terrified you more than anything else, because it meant you could no longer hide behind fear. It meant you had to move. You whispered, barely audible, "If I am chosen, then show me why." The wind shifted, the air felt alive, and in that stillness, you realized the journey would not begin with wealth, but with surrender, the kind that strips you bare before it clothes you in purpose. You walked to the window. The horizon burned with dawn. For a moment, it looked like fire meeting water. You didn't understand it, but you felt it, the merging of two worlds, heaven and earth, meeting inside your chest. That's when you understood the truth. The chosen one is not born through privilege, but through breaking. And so, trembling yet willing, you stepped into the unknown. The first step felt heavy, the second lighter. By the third, your fear began to lose its voice. Still, a question lingered. Would this calling make you whole, or undo you entirely? The heavens did not answer. They never do, not at first. Because faith is not built in clarity, it's forged in the fog. You took another breath and felt your heart align with something ancient, something eternal, a pulse that was not your own. In that moment, you were no longer waiting for the blessing. You were becoming it. And somewhere, beyond sight, the vaults of heaven began to open. Write 333 inches the comments. It's a prophetic sign of your divine alignment. You lifted your head toward the rising light. You were ready, or at least, ready enough. But as the dawn broke, so did the illusion of ease, because every divine promise carries its shadow. And yours was already waiting on the path ahead. The chosen one. That phrase still echoed in your mind like a memory that didn't belong to you. The night after the calling, sleep would not come. Every time you closed your eyes, you saw light breaking through darkness, rivers of gold flowing from unseen mountains, and in the midst of it, a question burned. Why me? You tried to silence it. You told yourself it was imagination, some emotional illusion born from exhaustion, but the whisper returned. threading itself through your thoughts, relentless and patient. And then came the voice, not from outside, but from somewhere deep within. It said, the promise was never about wealth. It was about trust. You wanted to believe that, but your mind rebelled. Trust? When everything around you still felt uncertain, when your prayers still hung unanswered in the air. You looked at your reflection and barely recognized the person staring back. There was a fire there now, but it flickered with doubt. The chosen one always begins with hesitation, because to carry divine purpose means to face divine silence. The days that followed were strange. Time seemed to bend. You would catch glimpses, moments when everything slowed and the world seemed to shimmer. A stranger's kindness. A sudden burst of clarity in the middle of confusion. It felt like God was speaking, not through thunder, but through ordinary things. But the more the light appeared, the more the darkness fought back. You began to feel resistance everywhere. Doors that had once been open now closed without warning. People questioned your decisions. Friends laughed at your faith. They said, if you're chosen, where's the proof? Where's the miracle? You wanted to answer. You wanted to defend the voice you heard. But the truth was, you didn't know how to explain something you barely understood. So you withdrew. Nights turned heavy. You'd sit alone, staring into the quiet, wondering if you had imagined it all. Maybe the calling was never real. Maybe the promise was for someone stronger, wiser, better. Doubt became your constant companion. Yet somewhere beneath that doubt, something small refused to die. It was the memory of that first moment, the vault opening, the light spilling through, and it kept you from collapsing completely. You began to realize that faith doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it trembles. Then, one night, as the city slept and you sat by your window, a storm began to rise outside. Rain hit the glass like shattered glass falling from heaven. You watched the lightning split the sky, and in that wild chaos, you felt it again, that same presence, that same unexplainable peace that wrapped itself around your fear. The storm outside mirrored the one inside you, and then just for a moment they became one. You stood, your hands trembled, not from fear, but from something holy. You whispered into the noise, if this is real, then let me see, not with my eyes, but with my heart. And the answer came not as thunder, not as a voice, but as stillness. The world stopped. The air changed. It was as if time itself bowed. You heard the words again, not from a distance this time, but from within your own breath. I am not asking you to believe in the blessing. I am asking you to believe in me. It broke you. The tears came before you could stop them. All the pride, the doubt, the anger, all of it melted in that sacred moment. You realized then that being chosen didn't mean being perfect. It meant being available. It meant saying yes, even when everything in you wanted to run. So you said it, quietly at first. Yes, and the room shifted. It wasn't dramatic. No thunder, no miracles. Just a peace so deep it felt like it could hold the weight of the entire world. You sat there for hours, letting that peace wash over you. But deep inside, you knew this was only the beginning, because saying yes to destiny is easy when it's peaceful, but faith is tested in the silence that follows. Days passed, and nothing changed. No sudden wealth, no visible miracle, just ordinary life. But inside you, something had shifted. You could feel a strange pull guiding you, as though each moment was a step towards something unseen. And then came the test. An opportunity appeared, one that seemed like an answer to your prayers. It promised quick success, recognition, comfort. But when you prayed about it, there was no peace. Something within warned you to wait. It made no sense. This was everything you'd asked for. Why would God say no now? You wrestled with it. The decision tore at you. You wanted the promise, but not the patience. You wanted the blessing, but without the breaking. And that's when you remembered, the vault doesn't open through force, it opens through faith. So you walked away. You let the opportunity pass. And in that moment of surrender, something invisible shifted in heaven. You didn't see it, but you felt it, the alignment of destiny adjusting to your obedience. That night, you dreamed again. A river flowed through a desert, and from its waters rose cities of light. Voices sang your name not in praise, but in purpose. When you woke, you understood what the vision meant. The blessing was coming, but first, your heart had to be refined enough to hold it. The chosen one learns that divine abundance begins not with gain, but with loss. You stood before the mirror again. The reflection hadn't changed, but the eyes had. They no longer carried fear, they carried fire. And for the first time, you whispered, not in doubt, but in conviction, I was not chosen because I was ready. I was chosen so I could become ready. And heaven, in its quiet approval, moved once more. If you feel this truth, hit like and subscribe. But as the dawn rose and the peace settled, a shadow moved behind it. Because for every rising light, there comes an opposing darkness, and yours had just begun to stir. The chosen one. That name had begun to feel heavier now, not a crown but a cross. Days stretched into weeks, and though your heart had awakened, the world remained stubbornly silent. The blessings you expected, the signs, the shifts, the evidence of divine favor did not come. Instead, everything seemed to break. The job that had once sustained you began to crumble. People who once called you friend drifted away. Even your own family began to question your choices. They said, "You're chasing something invisible." And maybe they were right. You stood in the ruins of what used to be stability, and you wondered if this was what divine calling felt like loneliness disguised as purpose. Each night you'd kneel in prayer, waiting for comfort, but the heavens remained closed. You'd whisper, "Why did you choose me, if all you would give me is silence?" But silence, you were learning, is not absence. It is the space where faith is born. The chosen one must lose what is safe before they can carry what is sacred. One morning, you woke to a strange stillness. The city outside felt paused, suspended between breath and awakening. As you stared out your window, you noticed the smallest thing, a single ray of sunlight cutting through the shadows of your room. Dust particles floated in it like tiny stars, silent and holy. In that moment, something broke open inside you. You realized that maybe the miracle wasn't something that would happen to you, but something that was already happening in you. You began to see life differently. The obstacles no longer felt like punishments. They felt like invitations. Each disappointment was shaping something you couldn't yet name. But faith is never a straight line. One evening, you met someone, a figure cloaked in charisma and certainty. They spoke with the confidence of a prophet, promising shortcuts to success and keys to unlock the life you'd been waiting for. Their words were smooth, their faith seemed strong. For a moment, you almost believed they were sent by God. Almost, until you heard that faint whisper again, the one that had spoken to you in your weakest hour. Not every open door is divine. Some are distractions, dressed as destiny. You hesitated. The offer was tempting. It sparkled like the promise of relief. But something deep within resisted. You couldn't explain it, but your soul recoiled. So you walked away, and when you did, you felt it a sharp ache, followed by an overwhelming peace. That's when you understood. Obedience is not proven in what you accept, but in what you refuse. You had passed another unseen test. That night, sleep came easily for the first time in months. You dreamed again not of gold or glory, but of a field. Endless, quiet, fertile. You were walking through it barefoot, the earth soft beneath your steps. And as you walked, you saw seeds glowing faintly beneath the soil, waiting for rain. When you awoke, you knew. Every prayer, every tear, every surrender, these were your seeds. Nothing had been wasted. Nothing had been ignored. The waiting was not empty. It was pregnant. But the waiting tested you again. Days turned into silence. Silence into fear. Fear into the temptation to give up. You wanted to go back to the life you knew, the one that didn't demand so much faith. You almost did. You even whispered the words, "Maybe I'm not chosen after all." And in that exact moment, a memory surfaced, one you hadn't thought of in years. A time when you almost drowned as a child, and just before the darkness pulled you under, something unseen lifted you up. You realized it wasn't luck. It never had been. You had been rescued before, chosen before, protected before. This calling didn't begin now, it began the moment you took your first breath. You fell to your knees. You wept not because you were broken, but because you were finally remembering. The chosen one is not chosen when they rise. They are chosen when they refuse to die. When you stood again, Your eyes carried a new fire, not of pride, but of knowing. You understood now that God's blessing wasn't a transaction, it was a transformation. He wasn't giving you wealth to fill your hands, but faith to fill your soul. The billionaire blessing was never about money, it was about mastery of the heart. You would no longer chase signs. You would become one, so you began to speak differently, to walk differently, to see differently. Every morning, you'd whisper, "I am ready to be the vessel, not the victim." And the world responded. Slowly, quietly, subtly. Doors began to open, but not the kind you expected. These were doors of purpose, not profit. People came into your life who needed healing, hope, guidance. And somehow, your words carried power. You didn't know where it came from, only that it flowed through you when you surrendered to it. That's when you realized you were already walking in the blessing. It had begun the moment you stopped trying to control it. But just as peace began to settle, a new kind of battle emerged, not around you, but within you. You began to fear your own power. Could you really carry this? Could you really live up to what was written about you in heaven? What if you failed again? What if you misheard the voice? You closed your eyes, trembling, and the whisper returned. The blessing is not fragile. You are. It wasn't condemnation. It was compassion, the kind that humbles and heals at the same time. You took a deep breath. For the first time, you stopped striving. You simply stood still, feeling the presence that had been with you all along. And for the first time in your life, you didn't beg God to change your situation. You asked Him to change you. The moment you did, the atmosphere shifted again. Something unseen moved. The vault was opening wider, not because you demanded it, but because you were finally ready to hold it. Write 333 inches the comments. It's a prophetic sign of your divine alignment. But as you lifted your eyes toward the horizon, you saw clouds gathering again. A new storm was rising, this one darker, more personal. It would test, not your faith, but your identity. And only the chosen one could walk through it. The storm had returned, not from the sky this time, but from within. You felt it in your bones before you saw it. A pressure, a stirring, a trembling that began deep in your spirit and rose like a wave. Everything you thought you had conquered, fear, doubt, pride, came rushing back, stronger, sharper, dressed in new disguises. For weeks you had walked in peace, certain that you had finally understood your purpose. But destiny, you were learning, is not a single revelation, it is a continual refining. And refinement always begins with fire. You woke one night with a weight on your chest, as though the air itself had thickened. Shadows pressed against the walls, whispering lies you had once believed. You're not ready. You're unworthy. You were never chosen. Their voices sounded so real that for a moment, you almost agreed. But then another voice, quieter, deeper, rose up from within you. The darkness only returns to test what the light has built. You sat up in bed, sweat beading across your forehead. Your breath came fast. You realized the real battle wasn't outside, it was in your mind. The storm wasn't sent to destroy you, it was sent to reveal what still needed healing. The chosen one must face their own shadow before they can carry divine light. So you stopped running. You stood barefoot on the floor, trembling but unafraid. You whispered into the darkness, "If this is the test, then let it come." And it did. The days that followed felt heavy. Everything that could go wrong did. Messages went unanswered. Money slipped through your fingers. Doors that had seemed open suddenly slammed shut again. You started to question whether you had imagined everything. Whether this calling was just a fantasy you built to survive disappointment. Until one morning, as you sat in silence, a memory surfaced of that moment months ago when you had said yes, the peace that followed it, the stillness that had filled the room. You remembered how real it was, how sacred, how undeniable. Faith, you realized, is not the absence of storms, it is the memory of light when the sky is dark. So you prayed, not with eloquent words, but with raw honesty. God, I don't understand you, but I still trust you. And something broke. Not in the world around you, but inside you. The walls you had built to protect your faith began to crumble. For the first time, you stopped trying to be strong. You allowed yourself to be broken. And in that surrender, heaven moved again. You heard it not with your ears, but in your soul. A single, powerful phrase: the chosen are not protected from storms. They are empowered to walk through them. The tears came freely. They were not tears of weakness, but release. You realized that every setback, every loss, every unanswered prayer had not been punishment, it had been preparation. The breaking was the making. You began to see it clearly now. The billionaire blessing was never about accumulating, it was about awakening. Wealth was never the goal, wisdom was. Abundance was never the prize, alignment was. The chosen one does not chase the world's gold, they carry heaven's authority. You looked around at your life and saw the pattern, the divine fingerprints on every disappointment. Every no had redirected you towards something sacred. Every delay had hidden a deeper lesson. And then came the realization that would change everything. You had been praying for breakthrough, but God had been building foundation. A blessing given too soon becomes a burden. That's why heaven waits until you are strong enough to hold what you've asked for. And now you were. That afternoon, you went outside and stood under the open sky. The wind was wild, but it no longer scared you. You could feel it, the storm had shifted. It was no longer against you. It was working for you. You spread your arms and let the rain fall. You whispered, "I'm not afraid anymore." The sky seemed to answer with light. Not lightning this time, just a soft glow that broke through the clouds, golden and warm. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It was simply peace. The kind that comes when a soul finally stops fighting its own becoming. You closed your eyes and smiled. You were no longer searching for signs. You were walking as one. Right 333 inches, the comments, "It's a prophetic sign of your divine alignment." But just as you began to breathe freely again, a new presence entered your life. Someone who saw the light in you and wanted to control it. Their intentions were hidden beneath admiration. Their words were sweet, but their energy was sharp. You felt it instantly. This was not a blessing, but a test disguised as friendship. And for the first time, you realized your greatest challenge would not come from darkness, but from imitation light. The chosen one must learn to discern not only the voice of God, but the echoes that pretend to be Him. The world was about to test your discernment. And this time, the enemy wouldn't come with fear. He would come with favor. The test did not come with thunder. It came with a smile. They appeared in your life at the exact moment you felt steady again, when the storms had quieted and peace had returned. Their presence felt like sunlight, warm and reassuring. Their words echoed your dreams. Their confidence mirrored your faith. They said all the right things. They even spoke your language: faith, purpose, destiny. For a moment, you believed they were sent by heaven. But the chosen one soon learns. Not everyone who speaks light carries it. At first, it was subtle. They began to offer advice that sounded wise, but carried the faint scent of control. They spoke of partnership, but their eyes measured what they could gain. You ignored the discomfort in your spirit, telling yourself not to be suspicious, not to lose faith in people again. But peace has a sound, and what they brought was noise. One evening, you sat across from them, their words flowing easily, promising expansion, influence, and opportunity. Yet beneath every word, you heard it, the quiet tremor of manipulation. They said, "God sent me to help you." But deep inside, another voice whispered, "Or to test you." That night, sleep avoided you. You tossed beneath sheets that felt too heavy, your mind circling the same questions. Were they an answer to prayer or a distraction in disguise? You remembered what the voice had told you before. The enemy doesn't always come to destroy. Sometimes he comes to align with the wrong purpose. You sat up, heart pounding. You knew you couldn't move in emotion, you had to move in discernment. So you prayed. Not the kind of prayer that asks for what you want, but the kind that surrenders what you think you need. "God," you whispered, "if this connection isn't from you, remove it, no matter how good it looks." The next morning, everything shifted. Their messages slowed. Their tone cooled. Within days, their interest faded completely. You never argued. You never explained. You simply let go. And though it hurt to lose something that seemed so promising, you felt a peace deeper than understanding. You had chosen alignment over attachment. That was when you realized, the chosen one doesn't lose people they are released from what cannot follow destiny. You began to see clearly now. The journey wasn't about attracting blessings, it was about protecting the purity that allows blessings to remain. You noticed how easily distraction dresses itself as destiny, how comfort disguises itself as calling, how ego pretends to be confidence. And you vowed, "Never again will I trade my peace for a promise." That day, you fasted not just from food, but from noise, from comparison, from urgency. You spent hours in silence, listening, and somewhere between stillness and surrender, you heard it again, the same sacred tone that had called you months ago. You have passed the test of discernment. Now you are ready for the next revelation. You felt it instantly. The air thickened. Time slowed. The room grew brighter, not with physical light, but with awareness. You saw flashes, visions of places you hadn't been yet, faces you didn't recognize. You saw yourself standing before crowds, speaking words that broke chains in people's hearts. You saw cities awakening, nations shifting, families restored. And then you saw a vault again, the same one from the first vision. But this time, it was open. Completely open. Inside, it wasn't gold or jewels. It was names. Thousands of names, glowing like constellations, suspended in light. And among them, you saw yours. You fell to your knees, overwhelmed. You understood now. This was the billionaire blessing, not the currency of the earth, but the currency of impact. Souls, not coins. Influence, not indulgence. The true chosen inherit responsibility, not riches. When you rose, tears blurred your vision, but your heart was clear. You whispered, "Use me." And the atmosphere trembled. For the first time, heaven spoke not to you, but through you. Tell them, the time of awakening is near. The ones who endured the breaking are about to walk in building. You felt fire surge through your chest, and words poured from your lips like rivers, declarations of healing, abundance, clarity. It was no longer about you, it was about the ones connected to your obedience. Every time you had chosen faith over fear, truth over comfort, surrender over pride, you had opened a door not just for yourself, but for generations. You were no longer waiting for the promise. You had become part of it. The chosen one does not chase legacy, they are legacy in motion. You stepped outside, and the sky seemed wider than before. The same world that once felt small now felt infinite. You realized the journey was far from over, but something had changed. You no longer walked toward your purpose, you walked with it. Write 333 inches the comments. It's a prophetic sign of your divine alignment. But even as you stood in that newfound peace, a shadow moved across the horizon, because for every revelation of light, there is always a countermove in darkness. And this time, it wouldn't come as a test of faith. It would come as a battle for truth. The question was no longer, are you chosen? The question now was, can you remain? The season of silence was gone. In its place came clarity, bright, sharp, and unforgiving. You had crossed through storms, through loss, through the quiet crucible of waiting, and now you stood on new ground. The air itself felt different, thinner, sacred, alive. You could sense the weight of purpose pressing gently against your chest. But with revelation always comes resistance. The war for truth. It began in whispers, the same way doubt once had. Voices around you, some kind, some familiar, began to twist the message you carried. They said you were changing too fast, that you were forgetting where you came from. Others tried to claim your words, to shape them for their own gain. At first, you tried to explain yourself. You wanted to defend what had been born in secret. But the more you spoke, the more you realized truth doesn't need defending, it needs living. And so you fell silent again, not in defeat, but in discipline. The chosen learn when to speak and when to simply be. But the war intensified. Opportunities appeared like gold, glittering on every side. Doors opened too many, too easily. Each one offered something you once prayed for: recognition, wealth, ease. Yet behind each door was a pull you could feel in your spirit, gentle at first, then strong. A voice, smooth and patient, said, "Why struggle for heaven's favor when the world already approves of you?" For a moment, you wavered. It would have been so simple to say yes, to take the crown without carrying the cross. But then you remembered the field from your dream, the glowing seeds under the soil. You remembered how long it took for them to grow, how precious that waiting had been. You couldn't trade that sacred process for speed. So you whispered the hardest word of faith again, "No," and heaven shuddered. That single refusal, that quiet act of integrity shifted something unseen. It closed counterfeit paths and opened the real one, the revelation. That night you were awakened by light. Not a dream this time, but a presence. The same peace that had followed every storm filled your room, until the walls themselves seemed to breathe. And you heard it not from the outside, but from within. You are not chosen for comfort. You are chosen for consequence. You saw it, images cascading through your mind like fire. Communities rising, hearts healing, children learning the language of faith again, the world trembling, not in fear, but in recognition of something pure. This was the truth that darkness had tried to distort, that the blessing was never about being lifted above others, but about lifting others with you. The billionaire blessing was not a number. It was a network of souls, each one awakening, each one connected by light. And in that vision, you saw yourself standing among them, not as a leader to be worshipped, but as a mirror, reminding them of who they already were. The battle within. Yet, even after the revelation, the struggle remained. The old fears didn't vanish. They lingered like shadows at dusk. You wondered if you were strong enough to carry what you'd seen. "I am not ready," you said softly. And the voice replied, "Readiness is not your qualification, willingness is." Tears came again, but this time they were clean. You let them fall. Every one carried away a fragment of doubt, of ego, of striving. You realized that the war for truth was not fought with swords, but with surrender. You lifted your hands and said the words that unlocked heaven itself. "I trust you completely." The wind outside rose, swirling through the open window. It felt like an embrace, wild, holy, alive, becoming the blessing. In the days that followed, things began to move quickly. Messages came from people across the world, souls drawn to your voice. Not because you promised them riches, but because you reminded them of purpose. Your story became a spark. Your obedience became a bridge. Your scars became scripture, living proof that grace still builds from ruins. You didn't need to chase destiny anymore. It had caught up to you. The chosen one does not walk ahead of the promise, they walk inside it. And you finally understood. Heaven doesn't choose the perfect. Heaven perfects the chosen. You stood at the edge of a new horizon. The same sun that once rose on your confusion now rose on your calling. You whispered one final prayer before stepping forward. "Let my life become the sermon. Let my light become the proof." And with that, you walked into the dawn not waiting for the blessing, but becoming it. Write 333 inches the comments. It's a prophetic sign that you are ready to embody your divine truth. But as light spilled across the horizon, a distant sound stirred the murmur of a new awakening. Because this story was never only about you, it was about the ones who would hear your words and realize they too were chosen. And their chapters, their storms, their callings, their miracles were just about to begin.